Stephen Hill did a two-parter in the Beaver Falls, and it was on fear and love. He was asking what's the opposite of love, and most people would think hate, but then he proposes the idea that it's fear, you know. And I was sitting there taking that show in like I do normally, which is really early in the morning before anybody else is up. And I was listening to that, and it brought up a bunch of emotion that I had basically left in my history back, a long time ago. And it was tied up with my religious training and stuff. And that fear, what you're talking about, that teaching in our religious systems that, you better watch out, you want to get all your ducks in a row, because boy, he can, the other day we were watching Frasier, the show Frasier, and Frasier had made a pact with God that if he would get Niles, his brother, through this heart attack, he would never have another crossword with his brother, and so he tells Roz he's about to strangle him. He's driving him nuts with his view on how wonderful everything is after I came this close to death, and he's about to kill him, And Roz goes, well, just go ahead and let him have it. And Frasier's character goes, it's God, Roz. Have you seen the Old Testament? He's brutal. And I started laughing, thinking that's exactly the viewpoint most of us have. He seems loving and wonderful, and he's really that, but don't tick him off, because his anger is a different type of anger. And of course, I had buried so much of that, gleefully buried it, and have moved on to better truths. And I say it that way because in those days, I thought that was truth. And if we believe in the absolute sense, God had me there.
Right.
He had me in those churches. He had me doing that strife and trying to do all these things, only to see how miserably I kept failing. So I say it that way. I'm, better truths than what religion had to offer, which I thought were truths at one time. But it really stirred up that fear message. And then that fear for me became this really hideous self-loathing. And it got to a place I had been, as a very young kid, I ran around in a neighborhood full of kids, and most of the neighborhood boys were older than me and another friend. And I was probably 10, 11 years old when I saw really hardcore pornography. Not Playboy, not Penthouse, nothing left to the imagination. So a 10, 11-year-old, how's he process that, we would go to someone's house and he could get his father's magazines, and then we were all sitting there looking at all this stuff. I didn't know how to process that. And of course, in those ages, the body is starting to wake up with testosterone. Right. God's plan for procreating the race is perfect and good and as it should be. But, here I'm coming into those years, and all of a sudden I'm like, I don't even know what I'm looking at, but I know there's something about it that I like. Right. So then you have that as a young person who's going to church. And then eventually you begin hearing this message about this hideous stuff, which is all around sex, and it gets to the place where you can't even think about it. If you're thinking about it, you're guilty of it, that type stuff. You add to that I have great parents. I always tease and say, the rest of y'all got second place. I got the first place parents. And my dad is a man's man. I mean, he ain't nothing he can't do. Um, I grew up listening to him tell stories about him and his buddies going out to get in fistfights. That was their fun. They enjoyed that. I was not that way. I was always a little kid. When I went to Wrights High School, I didn't weigh 100 pounds my freshman year till the end of it. I weighed 104 at the end of my freshman year. But I looked at my dad and I saw this, you know, virile, masculine dude, and that's who I wanted to be. But it really wasn't my identity in those years. And so I struggled with that. You know, all these layers that we navigate. And most of us, I know I did, I navigated them silently. It
Sure.
was all up here, constant. And that fear that religion kept pushing for me, the fear of what was waiting for me began to ebb away, and it was replaced with a white hot self loathing. I got to the place where I didn't understand why I didn't end it and just getting on with it. Um, they tell me a lot of people are going to be in hell. I'm just one of them because I can't get this life. That was throughout my high school years, my early married years. I was like, I've done everything. I've rededicated. I've recommitted myself. I'm back in the scriptures. I'm going through new Bible school information. You know, so many people hearing this, they know exactly what I'm talking
Right.
about.
I'm with
They're
you.
right on board. They know. Um, well, then, you know, just weighing it out, I thought, well, I'm not one of them. Well, then I just hated myself. And the anger I had towards myself was like I was a blight as long as I was on this earth. It led me to bring my father's single shot shotgun down to my closet without his knowledge, eventually getting a shell because I was only going to need one, and a red 12-inch ruler so that I could reach the trigger. And there were many times I went to bed in my bedroom downstairs knowing all of that was in the closet. And I look back, and for me, my dad had a brother who had committed suicide, and that thought kept that would pervade my thinking. Like I can't do that to dad or mom. I can't do that to them. And so that probably was always strong enough for me as his son because dad and mom very loving people. They you come through, they grab you, hug you, kiss you, tell you they love you. So I didn't have any misgivings about that. I knew I was loved. And I think that made the difference. I just could not do that to them. I don't think I was ever afraid to do it. I could have done it in that anger, uh, but I couldn't do it to them. And so I navigated that. And then as you get older and you get married and then you start having kids, there's a whole new set of reasons why you got to keep going. You got to keep your nose to the grindstone, keep going. Now I'm a church father. You know, I've got kids looking at me. Dane and I are, we're working together. We start working together in 96, 97. We're riding together. He and I are talking about our church experience. He's involved in a Sunday school class. I'm in a young adult Sunday school class. I think Dean and I and his dad and a friend of Dean's, Jeff, I think we all went to Promise Keepers together. I had gone to a Promise Keepers conference with the guys from my church, and then a year later went with Dean and his dad and a friend. You know, so we were doing all these things to get this all figured out. Um, that whole his talk, it was like I had forgotten all of that. And that is probably still a poignant struggle for you and I said this when we did the last show together. that our children are making decisions where their kids are concerned, our grandchildren, and we got to be respectful, right,
Right.
of the choices they're making. I want them to know that I support them. I'm for them. I'm with them. But man, I look at my 10-year-old grandson, and by the time he's 10 now, and I'm thinking I was already looking at material like that. Well, that kills me. I start thinking of what could be. Would he navigate it like I did? Would he get through it like I did? All that stuff. That's fear. That's that fear. Fear is so primitive,
Yeah.
too. I sat the other day thinking about just fear, and I thought fear is just so primitive.
It's a
It's not,
survival
yes, it's exactly a survival,
response.
something that assists you to
Right.
survive. You don't. You're looking at the ground. If you hear a rattlesnake, you're looking at the ground. I don't want to step on this guy. Um, or you run from things that are dangerous. But fear seems like fear has a limitation. It's not part of growth. I think understanding and knowledge begins to defeat fear. You know, um, and I think that's what Steve. One of the things Stephen was sharing, I really appreciated his sharing both shows because it reminded me of that fear, and I need to be conscientious of that where these grandkids are involved because there may be an opportunity, to share something um, when they're a little older, when they have a little bit more grasp of a situation, when I can talk to them. Uh, but oh, that was so I don't. It just like brought up some really uh, older thoughts and where I was and where I am now. I mean, fear does not take hold of me. You know that Proverbs 9:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And then the statement after, I meant to look this up, was something about the knowledge of God leads to understanding. It's something like that. The knowledge of God leads to understanding. And of course, we would say realization. And then the peace, you know, um, the idea of the Father being sovereign in all things, you can put peace in its proper place. Or excuse me, not peace, fear in its
Fear.
proper place. So that was a particularly good show. I've thought about it a lot here recently, um, and a big part of it was these grandsons coming up, and not you don't know,
Uh,
running around their neighborhoods, and you don't know if they go spend the night with friends and stuff. You just don't know, and that's where you're trying to trust and you may have to be there in some way for them.
and what a um, blessing it is to understand this because most
Oh,
people we know are living in fear
hmm,
uh, to some extent or other. I mean, if they're in church and if they're in the churches, there's this fear.
yep,
If they're not, there's just all kinds of. And when I think about that, it helps me to have compassion
yep,
and patience and just and kindness because they don't have this privilege
hmm,
of under having this understanding, and it's even when times are hard for us we struggle with it.
yep,
Imagine not having this realization.
right, right, exactly. The empathy, sympathy and empathy are a little different.
Yeah.
Empathy meaning you've gone through something similar or you can relate to this person's fear. Well, I do have empathy for those who are locked up in the stubbornness of religion and its inability to adjust or to yield to scripture. You know, the doctrines are more important. It's unfortunate, but that's the system many of them find themselves.